Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional and a communications expert talking to us today from Hawaii in USA, Mr. Peter Novak. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh.
Peter is the founder and chief executive officer of the Strictly Speaking Group. So, Peter, my first question for you. You have moved across academia, theater, leadership, and executive communication.
Mhm.
What were some of the key turning points that shaped your own career?
That's an excellent way to begin, I think. I really don't think I changed careers. I changed audiences.
Mm,
Really, the interesting thing is it's the same craft and my own passion of helping humans to be better understood.
mm,
And that's what theater does. That's what communication does. That's what I strive to do in academia.
mm,
And so I think for me, the issue was, for theater, the realization that all the things that I took for granted in theater that I thought everyone knew,
mm,
everyone doesn't know in communication.
mm,
How to enter a room, how to present effectively.
mm.
All of those things I think were important for me in thinking about how to help other humans communicate more effectively.
Well
And so
said.
every pivot
Mm,
was the same problem, just in different costume, essentially. How do people make meaning together?
mm, mm. I love your phrased changed audiences. Thank you. Peter, your
You
work
bet.
blends dramaturgy, linguistics,
Hmm.
cultural intelligence, and leadership.
Hmm.
How did this multidisciplinary approach develop over a period of time?
You know, I love each and every aspect of what I do, and
Mm,
communication is quite complex. It's the most complex thing that
correct.
humans do. And dramaturgy, which is the study of theater, of storytelling,
Mm,
essentially,
mm,
that gave me structure.
mm,
That helped me understand
yeah.
how we might structure storytelling in different ways.
Mm,
Um, and so that was really profound for me. And being able to provide different structures, I think, for executives and for teams and for people was really important to me.
mm,
Then linguistics gave me precision. And what I studied for years and years was the International Phonetic Alphabet, which are the
mm,
sounds of different languages.
mm,
And I became a specialist in sort of American English pronunciation and how that functions and works. And so I'm able to help non-native speakers understand what a native English speaker is listening for.
correct.
And I think that was really helpful. And then cultural intelligence gave context. It helped me understand different ways of communicating culturally. And what counts as clear
Mm,
varies by different languages and cultures and power dynamics, and all of that changes significantly. So, context is really important.
mm,
And then finally, leadership, which you asked for.
yeah.
Decisions happen under real time pressure. And so
Mm,
communication becomes a strategic system for people to use. And when you can integrate all of those things, it becomes really fascinating. Communication isn't just one skill, it's a stack of skills, I think.
correct. What a great response. Thank you. Peter,
Mhm.
let's now come to the strictly speaking group.
Sure.
And my first question is, what does executive presence truly mean beyond
Yeah.
posture and tone?
Yeah. Yeah. Executive presence is the ability to sort of create trust and direction in uncertainty. Businesses are always changing. They're always facing a new threat or a new change or a new dynamic or something, especially in this age of AI.
Yeah.
And so really it's, are you understandable? Is your structure and your pacing and your emphasis right?
Mm,
Do people understand your thinking
mm,
behind what you're saying? What's your stance? What are the trade-offs?
right.
People really follow others when they can explain what their decision-making process is and how they came to the conclusions.
Mm,
And then, do people feel respected
mm,
and included in your messaging?
mm,
Is your listening really refined?
mm.
Is your composure there? Is there fairness in what you're saying and believing? All of those things are really important. And so presence really isn't charisma, it's relatability or reliability and relatability under pressure.
Mm. Well said. And tell me, based on all the work you do with so many leaders,
Mhm.
what in your view are some of the common communication mistakes
Mm.
leaders make even at the highest
Mhm.
levels?
So I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that
Mm,
executives make is to confuse information with communication,
mm. Yes.
right? They think just by giving information that that's enough, and
Mm,
it's not. Um, Communication requires really trust, developing trust. It requires authenticity.
mm,
And so for me, that's the biggest marker is don't just give me information. Tell me why this is important to me as an audience member.
correct.
What does this mean for me? What are the stakes? The stakes are
Mm,
always there.
yeah.
So explain them to me and help me understand them.
Mm,
The second thing I think is they do one of two things. Either they don't give, they overshare, they provide too much depth,
mm,
when in reality, people don't want that much depth.
mm,
They want things made, complex issues and ideas made simple.
mm.
Um, and so people tend not to start with a clear core message,
Correct.
a clear headline, a clear takeaway. And if
Mm,
they start with that and end with that, that's the thing that people will remember. Remember when even in a podcast, even in things where people are getting a lot of information, they may remember only two or three things
absolutely.
if you're lucky.
Mm.
And so having a consistent message from the beginning is a really important, I think, dynamic in all executive
I
communication.
agree completely. But
Mhm.
you few minutes back you just briefly mentioned AI, and I wanted to ask you a question: is how is
Mhm.
AI
Mhm.
reshaping communication practices? And a follow-up question to that: can technology really help to reduce unintentionally reinforced accent bias?
Hmm. Yeah, okay. So this is a big subject. I'm really glad that you asked this. AI can widen access
Mm,
or it can harden existing biases.
right.
And it depends on whose data and whose sort of norms get encoded into the system.
Mm,
And so I think we have to be very aware of how bias is built into AI and start to, and it's up to the people who are building it to make sure that we are using real-time, information that is going to be less biased with a
mm,
wider range of communication styles and techniques and forces. Now, ChatGPT 4 or 5 also included cultural intelligence
yes.
into their models. And so you can ask it some pretty good questions. You can say, look, I am a native Gujarati speaker or Marathi speaker. I'm speaking to this audience, in Europe or in France or the United States. And you can ask it to help you understand how audiences might respond to you. And I think that's a very helpful tool.
Correct. Correct.
But there are so many other ways
Yeah.
that bias creeps into our own individual
Mm,
stances, and there's a lot of accent bias out there in a wide variety of ways.
absolutely. Absolutely. But the other aspect I wanted to get your perspective was that
Mhm.
there are many non-native English speakers,
Mhm.
and a lot of people think in their native language first and then translate that into English.
That's right.
They feel self-conscious. What would your advice be to them?
Yes. Feeling self-conscious about your speech is natural.
Absolutely.
And non-native speakers I'm going to switch the phrase instead of non-native speakers. Let's use multilingual speakers, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Because there are incredible benefits to being a multilingual speaker.
Absolutely.
They can shift contexts more quickly.
Mm,
They're able to understand different cultural nuances.
mhm.
There's huge data about their skills to reduce any memory defects later in life,
Yeah.
like Alzheimer's and other sorts of dementias, basically,
Mm,
because they speak more than one language. And there's an old, I don't know if you remember the old American films with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They were two sort of movie stars
yeah.
who danced. And my favorite line was about Ginger Rogers, that she did everything Fred Astaire did, only
Mm,
backwards and in high heels.
mm,
Meaning,
mm.
multilingual speakers are doing a heck of a lot more work than
Correct.
monolingual speakers are.
Correct. Correct.
In
Correct.
any meeting, right? If they're doing what you said, translating first into their first language, and then translating back into English, right? They're doing double the amount of work, and it's really important for teams to recognize that. And I would say one of the biggest issues is that global teams don't recognize how much work the non-native English speakers are doing.
Mm, mm. And
And
therefore,
so,
sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead, please, go ahead.
No, 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 go ahead.
I was going to say, and therefore, how can companies change
Hmm.
multilingualism into a
Hmm.
strategic advantage rather
Hmm.
than a perceived limitation?
Absolutely. You have to treat multilingualism, easy for both of us to say, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Treat multilingualism like a
Linguistic.
business asset because it is. It's not a communication issue.
Mm,
People who understand the cultural differences, right,
yeah.
might say, "Hey, look, we've got a market that we can expand to in this
Mm,
area that I know
mm,
specifically because I know the language, I know the culture, and how our product might work there."
yeah.
So first of it, it's to normalize, I think, multilingualism as an important part of someone's identity.
Correct.
Um, the other thing they can do is start normalizing all the tools that you can use, like captioning every meeting. Now, an interesting part of that is that captioning doesn't always, automatic captioning in meetings
Correct.
doesn't always catch
Mm,
certain accents as effectively as others.
yeah.
And that's where tech needs to really expand. And there are
Mm,
some companies that I think do a very good job having trained their AI
mm,
around accented speech.
yeah.
Otter is one of them, otter.ai.
Yeah.
And I really recommend that for meetings where everybody can have a good transcript afterwards, have
Mm,
summaries of what people said,
mm,
send pre-reads in advance so that people understand what the topic will be in a meeting and they can
mm,
think through what they want to say ahead of time rather than being caught in the moment, right? Where the stress is so much higher and having to speak immediately.
correct.
There was an interesting study that was done that said, first, there were a couple. One of them is that things change when multilingual speakers are in meetings together.
Mm,
So, for example, I was working with a team from Latin America recently, and they spoke English, Spanish, and Portuguese together.
yeah.
And they would code switch between all of these languages
Yeah.
and had all of these terms and phrases from each of those languages. And they would take turns more slowly and they would recap what each other said
Mm,
after someone spoke. And so there was a greater understanding, greater tools for understanding. But as soon as a native English speaker enters the room, all of that linguistic complexity goes away
correct. Correct.
and it becomes more competitive
Mm,
and turn taking becomes faster and
yeah.
you have to jump in and all of those things. And so recognizing that multilingual speakers are are sometimes disadvantaged because of those things. They have more linguistic skills,
Yeah.
but they can't use them in a room of monolingual
Absolutely.
speakers.
Absolutely. Very well said.
And and so
Very,
recognizing first and foremost that as a multilingual speaker, you have unique skills to bring to the workplace.
absolutely.
Um, and I think
And
that's an
we
important.
understand this whole thing of multilingualism very well in
Mhm.
India. I mean, our
Yes.
parliament functions in 26 different official languages.
Right. Exactly.
And simultaneous translations going on to members of parliament. So
Right.
thank you. That was very,
Yep.
very interesting perspective you've given me. But Peter, you also spoke a little bit about storytelling. And I want my next
hmm
question to be on this subject.
hmm
You teach storytelling as a strategic tool.
hmm
What makes a story truly persuasive?
Yeah. So I would say specificity, right? You can't be vague. Uh, a persuasive story, I think, makes the listener feel the stakes,
Hmm.
see the choices in front of them, and trust the narrator, trust
Hmm.
the person who's speaking.
Hmm.
So one of the things I always say is that a really good story has
Hmm.
to have tension. It has to have conflict.
Correct.
You wouldn't go to a movie to see nice people being nice to each other,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
There's got to be some tension there.
Hmm.
And so when you talk about the greatest way to create tension is to say to people, and this is in most sort of corporate storytelling, is here's the problem that we're solving. Imagine what the world will look like once we
Hmm.
solve this problem.
Yeah.
And if you keep going back to what the future possibility might be, and
Hmm.
that here's where we are, and here's the problem we need to overcome, but think about the future and what this would, that is a storytelling 101. That
Hmm.
is how do we persuade people about the future by rooting them in the current problem that you're solving.
Hmm. Very well said.
That's first and foremost.
Very well said.
Second is, why does this matter now?
Hmm.
And that brings a sense of urgency to it. And that raises the stakes of
Hmm.
why it's so important.
Yeah.
And so I think those elements combined really help make storytelling much more persuasive in corporate culture, but also in any culture.
Amazing. And what would you say is the biggest storytelling myth you have often have to correct?
That storytelling is fluff,
Hmm.
that we don't need storytelling.
Yeah.
That if I give them the numbers and I tell them the logic, that's all
Hmm.
we need to give them, right? Um, and I think leadership stories are really about values in motion.
Hmm.
It's really about how things are changing and how our values as a company or our products that we're creating or the services we're providing really move things forward.
Hmm.
And so really understanding what's at stake, the context around that can be
Hmm.
can be really important. And
Hmm.
oftentimes um, I think leaders don't take that into consideration.
Hmm.
You know,
Amazing.
what's the trade-off that you made to come to this conclusion?
Hmm.
What's changed now and why? And why does it matter to us as an audience? When you start telling those stories, people will listen. Um, and so storytelling isn't fluff at all.
Hmm.
It's the foundation of how humans communicate.
Correct.
And we've been that way for all of our existence.
Absolutely. Very well said. A few more questions for you. I want to
Mhm.
come to back to communication.
Mhm.
What techniques help communicators stay calm when the stakes and visibility are high?
Mhm. I, you know, a few things. One is preparation.
Hmm.
Um, I've heard people say, I don't want to rehearse because I'll just sound robotic.
Hmm.
And that tells me that they're not rehearsing correctly.
Correct. Correct.
Um, so the first and foremost is really understanding how to have a good rehearsal process
Hmm.
and what that means for you, and really understanding what it is that you're saying.
Hmm.
Um, and embodying that. So on the physiological level, some of the things that you can do are to really breathe, longer exhales,
Hmm.
grounded feet and presence, slower first sentences,
Hmm.
all of these things that can help you in
Hmm.
really memorizing your first 90 seconds of whatever it is that you're
Yeah.
going to say.
Yeah.
And memorizing your transitions because you probably know the content,
Hmm.
but it's the transitions and the recapping at the end. So we've just covered this. We just covered what are some of the mistakes that leaders make.
Yeah.
Let's now talk about some proactive steps you can take, right? Making sure that you're recapping for your audience and taking them along with you.
Yeah.
Um, um, bridging lines, lines that mean, what this means for you is this. Here's the decision that we made. What matters most is this. If you can bring those things to the forefront, people will
Mm,
remember what it is that you're
mm,
saying.
mm.
So, nerves really aren't the enemy, but lack of
Correct.
structure is.
Correct. Great
And so
response.
when you've got structure,
Mm,
and this is what dramaturgy taught me, it's a lifeline for people
mm,
because they can follow exactly their thought pattern of why we're saying this now and what comes next in the
mm,
story. Um, there's some great exercises around breathing
mm,
that you can do in a hybrid environment or in a live environment where you
mm,
breathe in um, on a count of four and you hold it on a count of four,
mm.
and then you release on a count of four and hold it again on a count of four. It's called boxed breathing, and that helps enormously.
Correct.
There's other type of where you breathe in, and then when you don't think you can breathe in anymore, you do another inhale to get even more, and
Okay.
then exhale slowly. And that's been proven to reduce stress,
Correct.
which can be really helpful. But there are a lot of little practices that you can do. And one is identifying what's actually causing the stress.
Mm,
Is it the number of people in the room? Is it who is in the room, right? Is it your boss's boss that you're nervous about? Um, is it being comfortable with the material? Is it that you're speaking in a language that isn't your first?
mm,
All of those things create different types of stress. And then, so there are different ways to, I think, um, ground people so that they're feeling more secure.
Great advice for my viewers and listeners. And Peter, my last question for you.
Mm,
Um, what skills will define the next generation of
mm,
effective communicators in a
mhm,
digital first world?
mhm,
What gives you hope about the future of communication?
mm. So, I think that we are going to be seeing less detail on English
Mm,
as AI gives us the tools to communicate in different languages
correct.
simultaneously.
Correct.
And I think it's going to be a real shock for the monolingual English speakers who have depended on their fluency
Yeah.
in English
Mm,
to give them a boost in some ways, in terms of credibility, which they shouldn't likely have.
mm, mm, mm.
And so I think um, there's going to be a AI fluency that's going to happen,
Yeah.
right? With drafting and summarizing and scenario testing,
Mm,
without losing human judgment. That's going to be really important.
mm,
Cross-cultural agility will be important
mm.
in the next generation.
Correct. Correct.
Listening
Mm,
is going to be a power skill. And then ethically persuading. I think all of those things are going to be really important. The premium skill is sense making.
mm.
That's what it is. AI
Absolutely.
will handle a lot of things initially, but humans will be there, right? Need to be there, need to be at the center of the communication to
Mm,
create sense together and meaning
mm,
together.
mm. Wow.
Um, so I
Wow.
think I think what gives me hope is that we're finally treating communication as a system. We're designing for more voices,
Mm,
um, and that's a really crucial skill.
mm,
In my work with non-native English speakers, giving them the confidence to be able to understand what native English speakers are listening for. And so we do a whole thing around prosody
mm.
and rhythm
Yeah.
and inflection and all of those elements that go into really strong communication. And we've got great systems to help people do that. Um, and so it's been a fun journey along the way, and I'm looking forward to doing more work in the future.
Absolutely. And on that note, Peter, I just want to say what an amazing 101 this has been on communication for my viewers and
Thanks.
listeners. And as you were talking, I went back to my school, which was over 50 years ago, and I used to be taught by
Mhm.
Irish brothers. in these
Uh-huh.
in India. And we were
Yep.
often told the difference between talking, listening, and communicating. And we were told that communicating really means that you've made sure the other person is able to understand what you are trying to
Exactly.
say. And
Exactly.
you took me back to the same thoughts
Principle.
listening to you. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we covered a lot of very interesting ground on
Mm-hmm.
communication, on storytelling, on
Mm-hmm.
technology. And what gave me assurance from you is the simple fact that as humans, wherever we may be, in whichever part of the world, whichever language we speak in, communicating is so critical for each one of us.
It
Thank you for speaking to
absolutely
me, and
is.
good luck to you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.